Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to start off by earlier someone was talking about the importance of having books, and I strongly agree with the importance of having books for any movement. I come from the Prometheus Books organization in Buffalo, New York, and the organization was founded way back in 1969 by Paul Kurtz, who is one of the premier humanist leaders in the world. And over the years, Prometheus has given out about $250,000 worth of books to various humanist groups, free thought groups, atheist groups throughout the world. And we wanted to start off here with the Patas group trying to get a library started. Now, over the years, there have been many humanist groups who have been so impressed with Paul Kurtz and his work that they've actually started humanist libraries known as the Paul Kurtz Library. Some of these nations include Uganda, Gambia, Romania, and various other nations. So what I'd like to do is start off by donating about 8 books right now to the Patas organization. Okay. Okay. The first book is this one, Affirmations, Joyful and Creative Exuberance by Paul Kurtz. And this spells out a very simplistic or a very simple humanist philosophy. And he also has various affirmations that you can purchase for only about $5 or so, talking about what it means to be a humanist. The second book is Science and Ethics. Can science help us make moral judgments? And this is a topic that we're very much interested in at the Institute for Science and Human Values, which is the organization that I help to lead. This is also edited by Paul Kurtz. The next one is by Guy P. Harrison, 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God. It's something that a lot of atheists like, and it's one of the best books on this particular topic. It gives you very good answers as to why people believe in God, and it gives you various atheistic responses to what they do believe. The second one, The Transcendental Temptation by Paul Kurtz, A Critique of Religion and the Paranormal. And this is one of his most influential books, and it's done much to lead people away from organized religion and into the humanist fold. Then we have another book by Paul Kurtz, Forbidden Fruit, The Ethics of Secular Humanism, or The Ethics of Secularism. So you'll get to see that we do have a good, strong moral foundation, but we don't have to believe in a supreme being in order to have that foundation. Then we have a book on the paranormal, Who Believes, Why They Believe, and Why It Matters by Eric Good. Dave, my brother who invited me to this conference, said that he would like to see more Filipinos involved in skepticism and humanism as opposed to merely atheism and agnosticism. So I thought that we'd do what we could to try to enlighten you in some points in that regard. It's also an excellent book, John W. Loftus, Why I Became an Atheist, A Former Preacher Rejects Christianity. And this is one of the best books I've ever read on the topic of atheism, coming from someone who spent a great deal of time exploring Christianity, examining the Bible cover to cover, and coming up with very good critiques of the Bible. Finally, we have this book, Victor J. Stenger, with a foreword by another of our guests, Dan Barker, God and the Folly of Faith, the Incompatibility of Science and Religion. So these are some of the books that I like to get started here, and hopefully more people will be willing to send more books. I know Prometheus will also send more books, and hopefully you'll get to have a strong library, and that can be a very good foundation for helping to build the movement. I also wanted to discuss a little bit about our journal, The Human Prospect. You might have seen copies of it on the back table. And this comes out quarterly. In our latest issue, I have an interview by Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of our leading astrophysicists. Also an excerpt from Paul Kurtz's book, The Turbulent Universe, and also quite a few other interesting articles. So if you're interested in that, and there are some copies available in the back, you can pick one up and feel free to read it. So I'd like now to discuss about humanism and why I believe it's important. The name of this organization is Patas, and atheism and agnosticism has been promoted, and with very good reason. But I believe that you have to go further than just atheism and agnosticism. By saying you're an atheist, that simply means you don't believe in God or gods. But the question will arise, what do you believe in? Now, say what you want about religionists, they do have an alternative. They do have a system of ethics that they draw upon, a system of ethics that they use to raise their children. But if you simply say you don't believe in God and have no ethical system, then you can set yourself up and set up society, in fact, for a great deal of problems. There are people who don't believe in God and who don't have a moral system, but in that respect, are they any better than anyone else who doesn't have a religious system? So as humanists, we like to say we need to have a positive alternative to religion and not just a rejection of a belief in the supreme being. I have a colleague named Bill Cook from New Zealand, and Bill Cook has an excellent book out titled A Wealth of Insights, Humanist Thought Since the Enlightenment. And he has an excellent quotation on page 225 of his book in which he talks about humanism and atheism. And he says, humanism is taking the consequences of atheism seriously, which means, just as I said, after you reject a belief in God, you have to have something to replace it with. You have to have some type of ethical foundation. And that's what we at the Institute for Science and Human Values like to focus on, supporting an ethical system. Now, a lot of religionists, as we talked about earlier today, will say, if you don't have a belief in God, you have no foundation for your ethics. And of course, we disagree with that entirely. Now, I discussed Paul Kurtz, who has spent the past several decades writing numerous books, going all over the world discussing the various alternatives to religion. And Paul Kurtz has developed a lot of various ethical ideas that we could use to draw upon to help to lead our lives and how we can transmit these values to our children without believing in a supreme being. Someone else who has been very good is, again, one of our guests, Dan Barker, who's come out with an excellent book titled Maybe Yes, Maybe No. And this is a book for children, and it's a book that you can use to help raise your children. You can teach them good moral values without telling them they're going to burn in hell if they don't believe in what you're saying, and without, in other ways, messing up their heads. So there are a lot of good alternatives out there, and we as humanists need to draw upon those alternatives and show that not only can we be good, but we do have good foundations for what we believe in. Now, there are a lot of religionists who say that even if you can be a good person without believing in God, you still don't have what they supposedly have. They supposedly have an objective foundation for their beliefs. Now, they claim that the nature of God is good, and therefore they have an objective foundation. But we say that if there is an objective foundation, it cannot be found in a religion, because religion basically comes from the subjective minds of fallible human beings, even though they posit a God. And so we would say that if there is an objective foundation, it's something that we could all draw upon, not just religionists, but secularists as well. And so we like to look upon the foundation as one that draws upon the consequences of our actions and ideas, or a consequentialist foundation. That is to say, if you look at murder, if you look at rape, if you look at carjacking, if you look at arson or any other type of so-called sin or crime against humanity, these are wrong, but they're not wrong because God says they're wrong. They're wrong because of the negative consequences they have to individuals and to organizations. Now, as I said, Paul Kurtz has done a lot of debating on this topic, and he's debated some of the best Christian minds in the United States. And one of those people he debated was William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig, I think Dan is debated him and pretty much demolished him in so much of the way as Paul Kurtz has. And William Lane Craig is another one of those who says that there can be no objective foundation for ethics if you don't believe in a God. But he debated Paul Kurtz, and as a result of the debate, they came out with a book called Is Goodness Without God Good Enough?, where he argues that, yes, you can be good without God, but if you don't have an objective foundation for your morality, then you could still be led astray. One of the people who responded to William Lane Craig's ideas was a professor by the name of Wolterson and Armstrong. And he had this to say about this objective foundation for morality. In my view, what makes it morally wrong to murder, rape, steal, lie, or break promises, for example, is simply that these acts harm other people without any adequate justification. I can't help but believe that it would be morally wrong for someone to cause such unjustified harm to me. There is no reason why I would have any more rights than any other person. Hence, it must also be morally wrong for me to cause such unjustified harm to them. So this is what he calls a harm-based system of ethics, in which what you're trying to do is to avoid harm to as many people as you can. And that is something that can be used as an objective foundation for morality, not a belief in God. Because if you have a belief in God, then you can have what's known as the divine command theory, which whatever God says is supposedly good. However, those of us who have read the Bible, and as it's been pointed out earlier, that atheists tend to be more well-read in the Bible than theists, what we know about the Bible is that there have been a lot of commands supposedly coming from the biblical God that were simply not good, to say the least. The Bible routinely condones genocide, slavery, sexism, homophobia, and numerous other crimes against humanity. And some people only believe these things because they read them in the Bible, whereas if they had read them anywhere else, they would categorically reject them. So the purpose of what we're saying is that if there is an objective foundation for morality, it has to come from a secular source, a source that we can all respond to, a source that we can all draw upon. Because if it can only come from a particular religion, then it's obviously subjective, despite what a religious person might say to the contrary. Someone was talking earlier about the various schools, secular schools, and how in the Philippines, people might be interested in starting a secular school. Well, one of the earliest secular schools in Africa goes back to the 1950s, and it was put forth by my late friend Ty Solarin. Now, Ty Solarin established what was known as the Mayflower School in Nigeria, and it was the first secular school of its kind. And it was very unique in that it was the first time that in any institution of education, Christians and Muslims would come together and learn. And there was no infighting, no problems whatsoever. And they were all united by this secular vision for education. And not only was Ty Solarin secular, but he was an atheist. And he used to regard himself as the only open atheist in Nigeria. And people knew who he was. He could go anywhere. He was one of the leading pro-democracy activists in Nigeria. He fought against various regimes. He fought against the military regimes, and he was very well known. And he was known as someone who was one of the best people, one of the greatest humanitarians in Nigeria. And he gave credit to his humanitarianism to his atheism. He was inspired by people such as the great freethinker Robert Greene Ingersoll of the 19th century and numerous others. So for those interested in starting secular schools, it can be done. It might seem like a daunting task, but it can be done. It's been done in Nigeria. It's been done in the Netherlands and Antilles. It's been done in the United States. There's a Carl Sagan secular school there. It's been done in numerous instances in Uganda, and not just the one that we heard about earlier, but there are other secular schools in Uganda as well. So for those interested in starting a secular school, I would be happy to get some of those humanists in other parts of the world to help you start one. And they're very impressive. When I went to the secular school that I spoke about, the Mayflower School in Nigeria some years ago, it was a great experience because I got to walk all over the campus, and you would see secular messages promoting critical thought, free thinking, and the children were really interested in learning more about humanism. When I went to a few secular schools in Uganda, it was also very inspiring because you had young people there starting humanist groups and skeptics groups, and they took their education seriously. So it's something that I would definitely help out to do, and I could put you in contact with a lot of people who are already doing it now and some who have been doing it for years. And I think that is the right way to go. The Institute for Science and Human Values, though, promotes what's known as planetary humanism, which means that we're concerned about the entire globe. We're concerned about things such as climate change. We're concerned about poverty worldwide. We're concerned about women's rights, human rights. And so Paul Kirsch has come out with various books on this topic. For example, he has republished Humanist Manifesto 1, and he also helped to put out Humanist Manifesto 2. He put out a Secular Humanist Declaration, Humanist Manifesto 2000, and lately a Neo-Humanist Statement. And he's gotten some of the world's brightest minds to sign on to this. And he has some pretty strong recommendations for how we as human beings can help we can help one another, how we can improve the environment, how we can make this world a better place. And so the whole notion that you can't have morality without God has been put to rest, or should have been put to rest. And for those who are interested in learning more about it, there are several books on the subject, several articles, and that's just something that to me makes no sense whatsoever. My brother also wanted me to talk about skepticism, because he says that skepticism is something that the Philippines needs. He seems to believe that there are a lot of paranormal beliefs in the Philippines, and it disturbs him, so he asked me to talk a little bit about that. We've had quite a few paranormal beliefs in the United States, and in the African American community, for example, back in the 1990s, there was a big phenomenon of psychic hotlines where people were calling in, getting advice from so-called psychics who could predict the future, tell them about their problems, and it was all just a scam. But it was very popular because these psychic hotlines were raking in $2 billion a year, and this is from people who just don't have a lot of money to spend like that. So we've had those types of problems, but when you think critically about it, then you can see exactly how you're being taken advantage of. In fact, there was someone who came to work for our organization a while back named Reginald Finley. He was a skeptic, and he used to be a psychic, or so-called psychic, along with his wife. And he said it's so easy to get people to tell you their information. All you have to do is talk to them a while, and either you can figure out exactly what their problem is, or they'll willingly tell it to you. If you talk to someone who's a middle-aged person, you know that person probably has some health problems. And sometimes you might be able to zero in on what those health problems are. And when you do that, then the person is impressed and thinks you have some psychic ability. But there are all types of cold reading methods you can use to fish for information to get it. And before you know it, you're looking like a genius. And when they're giving you all the information that they need in order to tell you what to do and to make your money. So, we need to develop a skeptical methodology, a skeptical mindset, a skeptical way of looking not at just religion, but at paranormal claims and about any type of claim, because some people are skeptical about paranormal claims, but they readily buy into political claims or various other claims. So if we have a consistently skeptical mentality, I believe that we put ourselves in a better position not to be taken advantage of and to be the critical thinkers that we know we can be. Now, I've been to Africa, and I got to meet personally some of these people, some of these juju priests, our so-called witch doctors, or the marabouts. And one reason that they're so popular in Africa is because of poverty. I mean, if you're poor, you're going to go where you think you can get your needs met, your basic needs met. And so it's understandable that poor people are going to be attracted to people making these types of claims that they can heal you. If you give them money, they can help to make you rich. And there are all types of claims that are being made. But I got the opportunity to go to some of these people and get these so-called readings. And again, it's all just a con game. But when people are poor and desperate, they tend to buy into these types of con games. And what we need to do is not only teach people to think critically, but to do what we can to try to eradicate poverty. Because as long as poverty is a problem, we're going to have these types of problems related to poverty. So we have to look at the overall issue and do whatever we can to try to improve life in the here and now. Also in the United States, we've had problems with such people, with such religious leaders as, for example, in the Nation of Islam, we've had Louis Farrakhan. And he would buy into a lot of paranormal claims, too. He's a religious leader, heads the Nation of Islam, but paranormal beliefs are also important to his organization. So he'll have things like a belief in the mother plane that comes from outer space, and that supposedly houses the spirit of his dead leader, Elijah Muhammad, who died in 1975. And you'll have these types of ideas that permeate the black mindset of a lot of the religious fanatics in the United States. But I believe that if we can just get people to think critically about all of these ideas, then we'll be in a much better position to move forward and to not only liberate our minds, but we'll be in a better position to liberate society. According to my watch, I don't know how much time I have because I came on a little late and I was supposed to be off by 10:30. Could someone tell me how much time I have left? Five minutes, okay. Okay. So I believe that it's important to promote both humanism and skepticism. And I'm still all in favor of promoting atheism. And I really like the way that this organization is set up with atheists and agnostics, because too many people get caught up in labels. There are some people who won't even associate with you if you call yourself an agnostic, because they don't take that label seriously. And some people will, criticize you for calling yourself a humanist or a free thinker. But I don't think we need to get caught up in labels. We just need to understand exactly what it is we believe, what we don't believe. We need to understand that we are united in a belief in secularism. We are united in a belief in changing life for the better in the here and now. And so I think it's good that we don't get caught up in labels, though you can't always avoid labels, because you have to tell people who you are and what you're about. And as you've discovered with an organization, you have to have something to call yourself. So it's not necessary to try to avoid labels, but it is good not to get caught up in being obsessed with a label and in not making enemies because they might not share your label. But to come together based on what we do have in common. So I believe that this organization is going in the right direction. And I'm glad to be a part of this historic movement, because this is historic. And it's not the first time I've been involved in historic moments. When I've gone to Africa, we had our first major humanist conference in sub-Saharan Africa back in 2001 in Nigeria. Back in about 2008, we had our first skeptics conference in sub-Saharan Africa in Senegal. I've been involved in humanist conferences in Latin America. We had our first major African-American humanist conference in 2010. So it's good to be a part of this, to be in on the ground floor. And I'm really impressed to see so many people here. And I'm really encouraged by it. And humanism, atheism, agnosticism, they're all growing by leaps and bounds worldwide. And that's largely because of the internet. So I think we're really on to something fantastic here, and I see that we have great leadership here. Hopefully we'll get a strong library here, and I think the future looks bright for PATAS, and I'm glad to be a part of it. Thank you. Any questions or? Yes.
Yeah, sir, you mentioned different terms. Now, can you just clarify for all of us what's the difference between secularism, humanism, and secular humanism, if there is any?
Right. Okay, yes. Secularism basically means without religion. And so you can be a religious person, but you can still be a secularist, especially if you don't believe in merging religion and state. Humanism pretty much means human-centered, but you can be a religious humanist. And there are various conceptions of humanism. You can be what's known as a religious humanist. That might be someone like a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association of the United States who doesn't really believe in organized religion per se, but might believe in some type of vague supreme being. They might be a deist or something along those lines. You have what some people call non-religious religious humanism. Right, non-religious religious humanism. It's a crazy term because basically it's someone who is non-religious but who has a religious model. They might go to a church like the Unitarian Universalist Church. They might do things such as light candles. They might sing songs. They might read from books, not holy books, but still humanist books. And so they're non-religious, but they still have the religious model. So Paul Kurtz calls them non-religious religious humanists. And you have secular humanists, those who are either atheists or agnostics. They don't believe in the supreme being. They just believe in human-centered thought and action. So that sets them apart from religious humanists. So there are a lot of different conceptions of humanism. For example, you have what the Black Panthers used to call revolutionary humanism. And their humanism was based on secularism, but it was based on radical politics. You also have an organization in India known as the Radical Humanists. So there are a lot of different conceptions. Just as there are different religions, there are different humanisms or different conceptions of humanism as well.
Hi, this might be a silly question, but pardon me for those who think that this might be stupid. You came from the U.S. and judging from your accent, I assume that you grew up in a black society or neighborhood. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen movies that depict black Americans as being big on religion, lively preaching, praising, doing Protestant stuff. Also, you would hear in most households phrases like, "Ain't you gonna pray on that first before you eat it?" Something like that, right? So how did you get out of the system? How did you end up as a humanist? How hard was it?
And the way I got out of it was that my parents were very open-minded. They always taught me to think for myself, and we had no taboo subjects in our household. I could talk about politics, sex, religion, God, anything. And when I was about 10 years old, I asked my mother how we could be sure we had the right religion, because I was learning about Islam and all these other religions, Catholicism, Protestantism, or what have you. And I asked her how we could be sure we had the right religion. And she said, well, you can never be sure. You just have to try to figure it out for yourself. And I asked, well, what if one day I decide not to be a Christian? What if I want to choose another religion? She said, that's fine, you know, as long as you're honest about it. And I pushed the envelope even further and said, well, what if I decide I don't believe in God at all? And again, she said, well, that's fine too. As long as you're thinking for yourself, I don't have a problem with it. So my parents were always open-minded. They never tried to force anything on me. They never tried to tell me who my leader should be or who my hero should be. If I asked them a question about my heroes or heroines, even if they didn't like those people, they would still buy me literature, have me read up on it. So always having the freedom to think critically, it was just a matter of time before I thought my way out of the religion. And I've never had any problems with it from my family, from my relatives, from my community or anything. I've never been ostracized and, you know, never had those problems that a lot of people go through, because we were always committed to free thinking and critical thinking in our family.
Became acquainted with Norm Allen through a magazine called Free Inquiry. I don't know how many people have read that magazine. But my impression in the U.S. when I was living there was what I knew about the Council for Secular Humanism, that seemed to be kind of elitist. I could give a couple examples, but it'd be kind of time-consuming. But Norm, can you address that issue?
The Council for Secular Humanism is with the Center for Inquiry in the United States. And I worked with that organization from 1989 to 2010. And many times that charge of elitism has been brought up. And basically because it was primarily an organization made up of middle class to middle-aged elderly white males. And so much of their philosophy was Eurocentric, and their whole conception of humanism had been Eurocentric. And when I got there, I tried to do what I could to change that whole paradigm. And so I put emphasis not only on African Americans and their experiences as humanists, but also Africans and the Latin Americans and various other groups. One good example of that is this book called the Encyclopedia of Unbelief. This book first came out in 1985, and it was edited by Gordon Stein. Gordon Stein died since, and there's a new Encyclopedia of Unbelief put out by Tom Flynn, who is he's the chairman, I think he's the chairman of the Council for Secular Humanism now. And in this latest book, it deals with humanism worldwide. And if you look at a lot of humanist literature, you'll see that the focus is primarily on white Westerners. But in this particular book now the first book, it dealt only primarily with white humanists. But the second one deals with Africans, African Americans, Asians, Latin Americans, everybody. And that's the way it needs to be done. But in the past, that wasn't the way it was done because the organization was primarily elitist. But that's something we have to hear about poor atheists and as opposed to rich atheists. And it shouldn't be about your class. You know, it should be all about whether or not you believe in God or whether or not you don't believe in God. And so my conception of humanism has always been not only international, but cutting across racial lines, cutting across class lines, cutting across all lines. And wherever I go, like I've gone all over the world. I've spoken to some of the poorest atheists in the world, and I've spoken to some of the rich ones as well. But I believe that we need to cut across these lines. Becomes a problem in an organization. It needs to be combated because it's not much different from racism or any other kind of ism.
You spoke about earlier about objective morality. So I think it's almost impossible to really have an objective morality, even if we base it on secularism and other philosophies. For example, we have medical ethics and other ethical standards. So when it comes to national policies, for example, here in the Philippines, the issue of RH bill or reproductive health bill, what really should be the method of determining, is it objectively correct to pass this law or not? Should we consult also the religious people or only the secular ones?
What is the law again?
Reproductive health bill.
Okay, right. Morality, which is why I said I'm not sure if there is such a thing or if you can find one. But I believe if there is such a thing, it would come from a consequentialist viewpoint or from determining the consequences of one's actions. As far as the reproductive bill, I've been reading about that actually for a very long time. In fact, probably over the past few years, I've been reading about that. And I believe that you would go into that situation the same way you would any other issue, trying to determine the consequences or the possible consequences. What are the possible consequences of the bill, or what is it meant to do? And the fact of the matter is we're going to make some mistakes, and that's what humanists need to realize. We're going to have our experiments, our social experiments, and sometimes they're not going to go the way we thought they would. But at the same time, if we don't take chances, we're not going to make any progress. So I would simply examine the bill and all of its details and try to figure out, if you can, what are the consequences going to be. And unlike religionists, we just have no surefire way. You know, a religionist is going to say, well, if you put your faith in God, everything will work out for the best. Well, we can't do that. We have to do the best we have with what we have. And all I could say is examine the bill, examine the possible consequences of the bill, and then make your decision based on that. If you believe the consequences are going to be negative for individuals and societies, then you shouldn't support it. If you believe on a whole it will be positive for individuals and societies, then give it your support. And that's pretty much what consequentialist ethics is all about.